I'm Gerrie, or Gerrie for the English speaking crowd. Gerrie Smits. I'm a freelance strategy consultant about all things digital, and I've been totally enamored the last 2 years or so by blockchain. So I now try and help organizations to figure out what blockchain is, how they could use it, and I've been writing a book about it. Unfortunately, so far, still only in Dutch, but who knows, that might change. So that's what I try to do.
So your book is, am I right in thinking it's like a blockchain for beginners, blockchain for dummies kind of book?
Yeah. I've got the ambition, I'm not sure if I succeeded, but I've got the ambition to drag people who don't know that much about it into the world as well, and start with some basics. It's not for my mum necessarily, but it's for people who might not have heard that much about it, and you don't need to have a lot of a pre-knowledge to actually get into it. But it's not just for dummies. It's not for the advanced people, but it's also, I've got the ambition to take people from the beginning and sort of try and get them and drop them off at different levels of importance of what blockchain could mean.
So I guess both our documentary and your book, we've kind of got similar ambitions. That we can see there's all this kind of potentially really good stuff and potentially really scary stuff, but a lot of people are just a bit, they don't even know they should know. They kind of barely know it exists, would you say? Yeah. So look,
yeah, absolutely. That's the idea. Then it is a technical product. It's pretty special from a technical point of view. But my feeling is that it's not going to help if we keep looking at it from a technical point of view, obviously. And we need more non-technical people in the field to figure out what we're going to do with it. And especially from the softer sectors, the sociologists, the whatever, I don't see that much studies or input happening from the people. It's all about either the technology or, of course, the financial aspect. And I have the ambition to drag it beyond that just a little bit. If I can succeed in that, I can die a happy man.
I've been talking to some people here in London, where I am right now, about blockchain in healthcare, which has been a really interesting conversation. I think I might do another one of these chats with those guys. But it's really hard to find, because there's so many people talking about the money aspect that it's harder to find people that are talking about the social changes. And I know one of the big things I want to focus on is kind of not talking about the tech, but like looking forward a couple of years and going, right, how is society going to change? How people, how jobs are going to change? What people should be worrying about? There's some kind of political activists that approach me as well that are trying to encourage me to tell certain stories as well. So we'll see how that pans out. But look, so first of all, we've had chats before, so, we're not going to talk about the basics, but this area is changing really quickly. I think last time we spoke was 6 months ago or so, or 3 months ago. What's scaring you right now about this kind of world with blockchain and kind of integrated technologies like AI and or areas that maybe should be using blockchain, i.e. security in your bank accounts or who people are? I mean, where are your concerns right now? What scares you for like your family in the future?
Oh, I was more optimistic.
We'll get into optimism in a minute, but
the scary bit, I think, is that it is still a very technical project where a lot of the, say the whole Ethereum crowd, which is one of those things that made it drop for me. It made the coin drop for me. I've got the feeling that these guys want to do good for the world. They say things like, we want to make something that does what the internet was meant to do. And that was sort of for the good of society in a way. But at the same time, there is, and you probably know more about it than me, talking about all these kind of underground hack dudes and cyber threats and whatever. It's got so much potential that it's pretty scary to start imagining what could happen with people who don't know that kind of social behavior, so to speak. But at the same time, there is that optimism or naivety. I'm a hopeful, optimist kind of guy, you know, that there is this concept of the common good, or that you can only, and that intrigues me about this whole blockchain thing, the idea of crypto economics, etc., is that it's based around, it's better for you individually, even if you have very much of a personal interest. It's better for you that you take into account the idea of the common interest as well. And that is such a weird dynamic that I've never ever seen in things, which makes me, yeah, there is lots of scary stuff as well, but there is that power of that common interest and the managing the commons, that maybe there is something new about that could actually make sure that the good becomes bigger.
So what I found really interesting around that actually is talking to various people. That I've been talking to some kind of quite left-wing, or what one consider quite left-wing, kind of radical activists. But, you know, I was having a chat with an MEP a couple of days ago, but his Pirate Party used to always also have like libertarians. And, you know, I live in the States normally, and libertarians are almost seen as like really right-wing, although, you know, maybe we need to look at not quite saying people left or right, because we're in different areas, and it is changing. So look, if you had, you know, you were given a job, some guy came to you, goes, look, Gerrie, you know loads about blockchain. Here's $1 billion. Invest in what you think is either going to make money or is going to be like good social benefit. What kind of areas would you be pushing for, investigating, looking at?
I think the interesting part is happening in that whole peer-to-peer economy. Projects like Swarm City, I've mentioned it a few times to you before on our other chats, started as the idea of Uber on a blockchain. They hate me for saying it always like that, but anyway, but it's the idea that how can you make a transaction which is in effect peer-to-peer.
So by peer-to-peer, it's like you and me giving money to each other without having to go through a bank or a PayPal or anything in the middle.
All the validation or the added values that third parties do, banks, but for instance, in Uber, what is their added value? They sort out identification, they sort out the payments. They sort out supply and demand, which is information, and they protect that. You know, blockchain can manage, maybe not just tomorrow, but at some point can manage all these things pretty well. Or a blockchain-based application can replace these kind of added values that a centralized party does these days. And that creates sort of opportunities for this peer-to-peer. It's like bartering again, but then on steroids, scalable. And that's a really intriguing area. That's a really intriguing area because it goes back to some older human values that we had trust, but we were looking at it in each other's eyes, and that created a trust. Now there's this technology that can replace that, which is intriguing, and it could take some power away from the central authorities, but it could create all other issues.
So it's almost like we've been, I don't want to get too kind of heavily political, but the last 300-400 years have been about various forms of capitalism, and it's almost like pushing a reset button on the economy. Like before, not like bringing it down, but a reset and kind of going a different way. Yeah. So what kind of areas would you say peer-to-peer is in? I mean, we all know about music. Is it different forms of music? Or, you know, is it banking? Is it, you know, what is it? Is it a regular job? Is it how I earn my money? You know.
Yeah. I think the whole job market, I think that's a difficult one. Sort of all these freelance. You know, the gigging economy, yeah, sure, you can see that happening. For the day-to-day basis on how our economies work, that's going to be, I think, a harder nut to crack. But I would more invest in something on maybe in research on how friends of mine who worked also in government, because government is really interesting, and said, well, if we could reset government and redevelop sort of, you know, the first principle questions. So why is government there, and what should it provide for its citizens, for people? And then knowing that blockchain exists, knowing that if you could start from scratch, then how do you organize society, or not organize society, but let society organize itself? Now, that's the thing that we've not done for a few hundred years, maybe, or a few decades at least, organize ourselves. And that would be a really interesting research and or experiment and or prototype kind of phase to do stuff.
Are you aware? I mean, I've been chatting to people, and I kind of hear governments are looking, they're doing stuff. You know, we all know about Estonia. I know people in like the Ukraine are looking at those, especially places where there are issues around corruption.
Yeah.
I have to say, I see that as a positive, but I also see it how blockchain can be used, and can see that it, you know, crypto, you know, a form of authoritarianism where they can also follow you. You know, this technology is really lovely and can do so many lovely things, but like any tool, you can use it in a couple of ways if you're not careful. And, you know, I'm saying we want to be the canary in the coal mine, helping people look at these issues. I mean, so explain that a little bit more. We've just spoken about, you know, blockchain and government. It's this very, what does that mean? What does that mean to you?
What I'm seeing right now is that a lot of governments are jumping on it because for what I call blockchain 1.0 is for me the financial aspect, sort of the trading, etc., etc. Blockchain 2.0 is that idea of
that's
optimization.
Like Bitcoin and all that.
Yeah. Currencies, coins, whatever.
So what's the next
as a payment system or as a store of value or as trading, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But that's sort of level one, and that's what the mainstream these days focuses on. 2.0 is more the enterprise architecture kind of way, where you could use stuff to program conditions into process flows. So you could optimize process flows, etc., etc. So the shipping industry, the logistics industry, the insurance industry, and the governments, whatever, they're all looking at how can you take away a lot of the back office stuff. And in government, quite often, and so we could add more value on the front office kind of stuff.
So that means, in a really simple way, to like average Joe, that government becomes both better and way more efficient at doing what it's doing. Because I think
there's a lot more efficiency gain to be made there.
Yeah, I think every government around the world famously always seems to trail behind the private sector in terms of tech they use and their processes. I mean, does that mean loads of government jobs are going to go? Do you think?
Well, that's what I also hear. I have been working with some government agencies and talking to people about it, where like here in Belgium, where I'm based, but also in Holland, UK as well, they're all looking at it. They're spending a bit of money on experimenting and what does it mean. And I hear stories about, hold on, our jobs are going to go, and that's going to be one of the difficult ones. Where here in Antwerp, where I live. The former head of administration, he was a big fan of blockchain. He's gone now. He's on pension. He's retired. But his vision was always, why do we have so many people working in an office block, shifting paper around? Why don't we add them into society where it matters, on the front office, so to speak, or within society? So his ambition was never to cut costs or make people redundant, but give them different jobs. Because let's be honest, why have you done an education, or why do you sit behind a desk shifting paper around? As human beings, I'm sure we can do a lot more value, add more value to the world if we can avoid that. Now,
so it means there might be different jobs, like a bunch of jobs will go, but hopefully that means a bunch of new jobs will create. So the internet's taken a bunch of jobs away, but there are now lots of social media managers, and data analysts and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, of course, I wouldn't say that it might be a logistics company primary concern to keep people on the payroll. So for them, it might be more of an efficiency exercise, but for governments, it may not be necessarily that. It's
depending on the government,
but it's not necessarily putting people on the street.
Okay. And I guess, you know, there might be in Europe, I guess, different attitudes towards that versus, say, the US, where, you know, there's a stronger hate of amongst a certain sector of government. So
it depends definitely much on the kind of the part of the world that you live in. You know, in Europe is a relatively trusted and relatively strong central government authorities, relatively, compared to other parts of the world, and especially in the States, where you see that whole dichotomy between more of a black and white relationship than here in Europe. But there is, it wouldn't surprise me if lots of blockchain stuff starts happening there, because it taps into that complex relationship with central authorities and inequality.
Okay.
Which is a little bit more from what I understand. It's slightly more prevalent in the States than it is in Europe.
Yeah. So look, you've made me think about universal basic income, and I want to go back to that maybe in a second. But so you've spoken about, blockchain 2.0. We're an internet 3.0, potentially 4.0, or maybe not even internet. Maybe it's AI and whatever is above that. So what's 3.0 in terms of blockchain with AI and all these other things?
Yeah, AI, for me, it's more on a conceptual level. It's not so much technologically more advanced, but it is that idea that it is a platform facilitation. It's a platform that fixes a few functions like identity, trust, even conflict resolution. You can do these things differently in a more decentral and programmable kind of way, which allows a lot of people to, as you say, reset a few buttons. I wouldn't say it's utopian, but it's a bit more conceptual at this stage. But that's where, for instance, governments and companies are finding it hard to define their added value. So I've developed this little concept. I haven't practiced it a lot, called a value mapping exercise. To figure out where as an organization or a company, profit, non-profit, whatever, you try to figure out where your added value is. And if that's being taken away by something that blockchain can fix, either internally or through a competitor, then you might be in trouble. And I've heard from like insurance companies, they've been doing blockchain stuff for a while, or at least the good ones. They've been experimenting with it. And whenever they come up with ideas in workshops, there's optimization ideas, 2.0, and then there's really fundamental ideas, 3.0, where they realize, like, holy shit, the concept of insurance, that's actually blockchain. What is insurance more if you really look at it from a very simple point of view? I'm a simple guy. It's a bunch of people who don't know each other. They put money in a pot, which is redistributed according to certain conditions that we all agree on. Well, that's smart contracts, sort of explained with money being redistributed in some kind of way with parties that necessarily know each other. That's insurance, if you really look to the core of it. So,
yeah. So do you know
these insurance companies, they realize, holy shit.
Do you know what, Gerrie? I think the internet cut out a couple of times, so I didn't get it. Would you mind just saying that last bit again, just so we get it properly?
From which part?
Just this last concept about, it's
insurance companies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, these I've heard of insurance companies that are doing workshops to figure out what should they be doing with blockchain. And they come up with 2.0 ideas, so they call them, about optimization. Yeah, you can program lots of stuff. But then the smart ones apparently also realize that there is this 3.0 version of facilitation blockchain. What can it do? And if you look at what insurance really is, basic, I'm a simple guy, right? It is a bunch of people who don't know each other that put money in a pot that is being guarded and being redistributed under certain conditions. That's basically a very simple way of explaining smart contracts and kind of blockchain applications. So these insurance companies that get it, they also do realize, like, our added value is in, like, storing the money and figuring out ways to redistribute that money with our profit margin. That could be eaten into that added value. That could be even that blockchain can do. So how are we going to deal with that? Of course you don't know, but the concept of peer-to-peer and people doing business or exchanging something valuable in between parties, that goes back to a lot of core cases again, where we've built industries on.
You spoke about smart contracts. Help understand that. So smart contract. You tell me what smart contracts are, and because I think that's one of the fundamental parts.
No, that's probably somebody. As I said, I'm a non-technical person, so I try to understand things simply. I
think smart contracts are one of the things that might help people. So I put headphones on, by the way, as well, just because there's noise happening. I'm in a kitchen right now. Smart contracts, I think, are one of the fundamental part of the blockchain. I think it's something easier for people to understand. In like explaining it to your mother, how would you explain smart contracts?
To my mum, okay, a bad example. No, I try to explain it. For me, it's kind of like the very simple way of, if this happens, then that happens. If this, then that. You kind of build logic into something. The only thing that's different is that it builds on that level of blockchain 1.0. It's sort of the immutability. So you get that as an extra value, and smart contracts can then be used to sort of build blockchain-based applications, and you create all kind of conditions that, if we all agree that these are the conditions, then they will be executed without any doubt.
So in a way, would it be fair to say that, like, if I consider using Uber to get around, by putting the app in, without me putting money in, giving money to the driver knows he's going to get paid for taking me around, it happens automatically. So smart contract is a little bit like that, where something happens, the next thing happens automatically. So it's, there's not a person.
If the condition is fulfilled, then the output will definitely happen.
And so where do you see that starting off?
Well, it has started off. I mean, it's definitely,
So what are the best use cases of smart contracts right now?
Best use cases for smart contracts. There's a few intriguing ones. There's one that they're starting to look sort of in that 2.0 version, sort of governments are starting to look, if this happens and it's validated, then all these other steps happen as well. I mean, government for me is sometimes like an if this then that machine, basically. That's what a lot of their functions are, if this then that's. And if I can prove validation that I live in a certain area, or if I can prove that this car is mine, then I get like a resident permit for my parking, those kind of things. So that's where governments are working on. On that 3.0 level, it's that, again, that sort of the peer-to-peer economy, places like District 0x or Swan City, where they can build little applications that effectively create smart contracts or temporary agreements between two parties. Where
so explain Swan City to me a little more deeply.
The basic use case is, I need to go from A to B. Hey, I have a car. Let's go into a temporary agreement where we agree on a price. That money is being sort of set aside in a holding contract, and once we both agreed that we've both done our part of the deal, that this was good service and I've driven you there, you go agree, and the money gets sent to the driver.
So this is Swan City is kind of like infrastructure for a city based on blockchain. Is Swan City like infrastructure for a city, helping a city move more smoothly? For
a city, yeah, you could look at it that way. That was sort of the basic use case that they started with, and it was a bottom-up movement from sort of angry cab drivers that started it, which is also interesting. It didn't come from top down; it came from bottom up.
So tell me a bit more about that story.
So there was I can't remember exactly. I know the guys a little bit. I don't know the whole backstory, but they in a few American cities where Uber and Lyft were being banned by the governments for all the reasons that we know, a bunch of cab drivers started organizing themselves like, hey, that's all good, well and good that you're trying to protect us, but our job has gone, our income has gone. And they tried to organize themselves through the amazing technology called Facebook groups, where they say, hey, if you want to ride, just drop it in the Facebook group and I'll flash my certificate and we'll agree on something. Now, that's pretty crap technology to do that. And these things started to work and they started building communities, then a couple of people say, hey, but we could redo this on blockchain. Let's try and do that. And there was a couple of smart people in these groups say, yeah, why not? And they did an ICO and they raised some cash, and a bunch of taxi drivers bought these coins, not necessarily the big investors. So it's come from that bottom-up movement, the disillusion with certain things or the anger over certain things that is driving more part of that movement as well.
So there are some social sites a bit like that as well. Steam It is one, which I won't go into too much, but would you say, if we were trying to explain this to other people, this is going to be up on YouTube, so for those people, is it like doing a new version of Facebook where maybe you get a couple dollars back for them using your information to sell ads? So say new Facebook made $10 off you, or $10 profit was made, and maybe you get a couple of dollars back or more dollars back as a thank you for using your data.
Yeah, that's where the really, really interesting part of it is, I have no answers, but there's a couple of smart guys talking about tokenization of the enterprise. I think that if Zuckerberg, I don't think
that's
there's
a lot of jargon. You've got to explain that.
Yeah,
in simple terms.
Where they basically, how do you make sure that all the stakeholders in a product, whether you're a user or an investor or an employee or whatever, are rewarded in a more even, not an even way, but in a more relative way to what you put in. Facebook is the prime example of that. There's almost 2 billion people now on Facebook who get very little financial value out of it, while we put an enormous value in, and the financial value gets distributed to.
So by that, we're talking about the fact that, you know, Facebook is making, I have no idea what their figures are this year, but they make kind of billions in profit. And it's the fact that, yeah, they're giving us a product for free, but actually 2 billion, a little bit should come back to us.
Maybe that's out of balance. And there's these ideas that, and they are conceptual ideas, but that I do believe that if Facebook wouldn't exist and he would invent it right now, I think he wouldn't do an IPO and go to the shares to get investments. I think he would do an ICO and write out a Facebook coin and figure out ways to redistribute the value creation to all the people that add value to the system by generating data, creating content, whatever. You know, there's complex processes to be mapped, but I do think that he would do that and create.
So an ICO, just for anyone, it's an ICO is kind of like an IPO. It's kind of like raising money in the stock exchange, but you get the equivalent of a different kind of Bitcoin, for example.
Yeah,
so
you don't necessarily get a share. It's kind of like between a share and like a functional token that you could maybe use in these things. I mean, there's so many different definitions.
It's almost like a members club card that you get benefit from.
Members club cards, but it's the members club cards, the tokens that sit on there are tradable, so you could exchange them immediately. So that part of, I could send you some, you could send me some, whatever.
To use it to get into a club, my gym, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Okay. So, God, there's so many subjects there that run out, but let's go back to UBI, to what we're talking about. So we
were talking about UBI, yeah.
So if we're talking about there being less jobs, even if things settle in, maybe things will settle after a decade, but, you know, like the other industrial revolutions, you know, we're calling this the fourth industrial revolution. Like the other industrial revolutions, there's a time of change. UBI, universal basic income, a lot of people are talking about it. Some people are talking about it from a kind of leftist socialist, it's a good thing that we need to do. I've also seen some really interesting conversations from people that are libertarian and really on the far right, going, well, look, if we have universal healthcare and universal basic income, that means most people are going to be okay. So we can be uber capitalists and really like no regulation on doing business because everyone can survive and be basic. What are your thoughts around that area?
Yeah, I haven't really thought much about universal basic income because it's got to do a lot with sort of social economics, and I'm just not that smart. I'm not on that subject matter. But I do, you've been saying it a few times now, this idea of left and right and polarization. And again, I'm not really that into the politics of it, but it's funny that it appeals to both sides, to sort of the more, I was talking to some anarchist guys a few months ago about it, and he said, yeah, all my anarchy friends, whether they're from the left anarchy or right anarchy, they're all into it. And I see it a bit as a little circle where they were polarized before. And blockchain is kind of here, where it appeals to the libertarians because it's greed and entrepreneurship is good, because that's what drives a lot of these libertarians to, or at least the financial side of it. But you can only, with blockchain, you can only achieve extreme wealth if you take into account common incentives and take other people and share that, create value not just for you, but also for other people. So the more value you create for other people, the more value you will create for yourselves. And that's where these niche economy coins are really intriguing element of how you can do that. And then you get the balance. So the libertarians are intrigued, and the more, it's not really the left or the communist or whatever, it's more like egalitarians who are more interested in a fair distribution of wealth. Not evil, not equal. Sorry, not evil. I mean, not even or equal, but more egalitarian in relation to what you've put in. And then that creates a whole different dynamics.
Yeah.
Is a universal basic income then gonna stop entrepreneurship? I'm not sure. Is it going to create more sort of literally a basic income for everybody, so everybody is a bit safer? Yeah, sure, but I'm not sure if UBI, as we understand it now, is the answer.
Okay, that's interesting. And do you know, we don't want to be too political. We want to talk about how the tech's going to change society. Just that's what a lot of people think needs to happen for the tech to move forward, I guess.
Yeah.
So changing subject a little bit. So blockchain, AI, these fourth industrial revolution technology, a lot of people are saying it can help, you know, I don't want to say the third world, but like developing and emerging nations. So we all know that, you know, like mobile banking changed Africa. You know, they didn't have telephone lines, they didn't have banks, but they now kind of have more high-tech banking on their phone than a lot of Europeans did, you know, or back in the day when it started 10 years ago or 5 years ago. How do you see blockchain helping emerging economies or you know, I've been looking at, you know, I've been hearing about blockchain around fair trade to help farmers make sure they get enough money, or small farmers. Talk to me. What have you investigated when you've been looking around at that subject?
Yeah, it's again the theory is promising. The theory says that you could make something like provenance, which is an interesting company or an interesting concept, where you get that you be able to track where things are happening, for instance, around fair trade or biological blah blah blah, your food, etc., etc. So people at the beginning of the chain could get again a fairer part of the deal, and it's again that fair distribution of wealth.
So blockchain around that means, so not only do you know the farmers getting the money they should be getting, and it's not going to middleman, it also means you know where your food came from, where it traveled, and so whether you care about what you're putting in your mouth or you care about.
And how do you do that? Maybe through stories that could be validated. I mean, they're still experimenting with that. They could do that with data from I don't know. Was my piece of fish always kept cool as well? Or you can do it on that logistical level as well. So they're more going towards the on the friendly side, I think. But there's just lots of scenarios that you can start building. I mean, that's what the Walmarts of these days of this world are all doing, of course, that sort of supply chain tracking and see where it goes wrong. But provenance is kind of like the more ethical way of where did it go wrong from a conceptual or an ethical point of view.
So you spoke earlier about you know, your interest in changes to society. You know, what are the areas that really piqued your interest researching your book around changes in society that might come about or should come about because of this?
About the third world, or in general, you mean?
In general now. Yeah.
What piqued my interest was that it could be this sort of the reset button, as you call it. The idea that on one side, the world's not doing too badly, especially not in the Western world. On one side, you could see that all these trust barometer studies show that there's not an amazing amount of trust in central institutions, whether they're CEOs or businesses or governments or media. So something's not going that well. And blockchain, because of its elements, like the core elements of blockchain are something like reliability, immutability, transparency, identification. These kind of concepts have the promise, I'm not saying that it will, but there is a promise there that it could replace a few of the functions that these central authorities have been claiming, not necessarily out of bad intention, but over the years, maybe the functions that these authorities have fulfilled have been maybe taken apart a little bit. And that's what piques my interest, that there is maybe a way, potentially, maybe, and I'm being careful here, that we could redraw a few of the lines and redraw a few of the ways that we live together as people, or whether that's in a day-to-day basis or on a big economic basis, and the way we try to make this planet I'm sounding very fluffy now, I realize. But,
no, it's good. It's great.
Yeah.
All right.
But,
So in you talking about this, I want to go back to this word immutability, because it's used a lot. And I think it's one of those words that is very accurate, but for some people kind of get what it means, but not quite. It's kind of the truth. It kind of means it can't lie. It's like Pinocchio. Actually, that's a good example. It's basically Pinocchio's nose.
It can't lie. Someone explained it to me very well about a techie. He said, we're talking about auditing. We spend an enormous amount of time and money on checking, double checking, triple checking stuff in all kinds of organization. And he said to me, like, auditing's dead because blockchain is auditing. And I was like, yeah, I get it. So if we agree on the conditions, blah, 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 and then something goes wrong, then there's a red alarm that goes off. And he's like, no, you don't get it. There is no red alarm. There's no alert anymore. It won't happen. The system doesn't lie. If the conditions are not fulfilled, the transaction, whatever that is, won't happen. That's true. So auditing, probably not necessary anymore. Pre-auditing of conditions. What are the agreements that we actually step into? That's going to be much more important.
Okay, so that's an interesting concept. So it's not if any cheating is going to happen, it's not going to happen on the actual exam. It's for cheating on what the exam questions were.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a different way of thinking, which I think is important.
And it's a different way of looking at it. And I like these different ways of looking at it. What does that mean in the practice? Are we going to have some kind of specialist lawyers that look at smart contracts? What do they mean to make them understandable for people?
So could this potentially mean, and I've not read this, I've just made this up, like for tax purposes, there's been a lot in the news this week about people avoiding tax, the Panama Papers. Does this mean, for example, if people were taking money in, that money would automatically go to government, the tax owed, you couldn't shift it around, or that governments could see what track money that's come in? They could see your McDonald's purchase, so McDonald's can't avoid paying tax on that. Would that?
Yes, tax is a very, very painful one in a way, because I think, was it the UN or whatever, some big organization predicted that by 2025 or something, there will be a government doing the taxes through a blockchain-based application app. And that's how you explain it, that if all the money streams are known, then you could program them in such a way so taxes go to such and such and such.
So you can't avoid tax.
So you could avoid tax. And that's a weird thing. I mean, all these coins are fantastic for avoiding tax, but blockchain is fantastic for not avoiding tax. And there's going to be this kind of like fight between what's wrong.
Which country do you think that might be?
I have no idea. It's either going to be
a rich country. Do you think it'll be a
trusted country like Sweden?
Okay.
Or a country from an underdeveloped that makes a giant leap into the future and manages to do it without the backlog of history.
Okay, so it probably wouldn't be Greece because there's maybe too much friction there, but it might be a country that's just come out of revolution or something, and they bring in.
Or things like Singapore, Estonia, that sort of I mean, they're doing it a little bit in Switzerland already on city tax level. There's a few cities in Switzerland that are allowing, I think, for businesses to pay part of their taxes in Bitcoin. So these experiments are happening.
All right, so it's like baby steps.
Are taking them up on that opportunity to do that. So that's a sort of intriguing little things.
Okay, that's an interesting part of the world. I mean, what other changes do you think are going to, do you think there's going to become one country that becomes, or is it Estonia, that is kind of this blockchain leader that has the laws that allow cryptocurrency changing, where all the government services are on the blockchain, they use AI to work out where to spend money. Is that Estonia? Is that somewhere else?
Yeah, I hear a lot of good things about Singapore for starting businesses. Switzerland is good because they from a law, they're pretty good with doing money stuff, right? Differently, have done over the last decades or longer. Estonia seems to be pretty good from a technical point of view.
Interestingly, someone yesterday mentioned
a lot of
Kazakhstan.
knowledge sharing there.
Okay. Interestingly, someone mentioned Kazakhstan to me yesterday, that an authoritarian ruler can just bring the changes in. Now, I don't know how blockchain and an authoritarian ruler, how that works, but
well, it's funny that you say that, because I once worked in Dubai on a blockchain project, and they have the ambition to run that whole city on blockchain by 2020.
So what do you mean by Dubai running its whole city on blockchain by 2020?
Basically, their government administration and sort of the back office and the efficiency part of it. They have really high ambitions. They got quite a lot of cash there, and they've got also the authority to just go, this is a decision, let's just do it. Whether that's good or bad, I'm not so sure, but it's also those kind of places like Dubai where in the next year or so, I think a lot of the signals will become clear on what it could lead to. They've already said, I think, was it a couple of months ago? They said, at least, I'm not, again, what you read in the press is not necessarily what happens behind closed doors, because then there's panic, like, oh, they've said in the press that we're going to do this, but we don't know how. But at least they've got the ambition to say, okay, like the land registry, and which is always a concept in blockchain, land registry digitized on blockchain, so we can make the transfers of it much cheaper and quicker.
And actually really know who owns something.
Say again?
And actually really know who owns something.
Yeah. Land ownership is a massive thing. That third world country will come to that. Sweden, Georgia, whatever, they're all working on it. And Dubai, they just go, come on, let's do this. They just go, bam. How real that is, I'm not sure. But they've got a huge ambition, huge money, and a huge authority centrally to make things happen. I'm not saying that's going to be on that 3.0 peer-to-peer level, but on a 2.0 efficiency level, they might be an interesting. I
might have to email you about that and follow that up. But yeah,
sure.
You said you're going to get, which I just blanked out. You said you're going to get back to a country.
Land registry and third world.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about third world before, where the fact that you can immutably prove that something is yours is important, for instance, in land and property. Again, in our Western world, not a major issue, but in African countries, after a major natural disaster like in Haiti a few years ago, I can imagine it not being that easy to prove that this particular piece of land was yours or whatever. The transfer, if there was a death involved or whatever.
There's been
lands are yours.
Like riots around, people claiming that farmland that generations of families have farmed wasn't theirs, it was someone else's.
Yeah, and ownership in agrarian, is that a word? Cultures is a major issue. That's something that could put you on the map as an entrepreneur, or give you some economical chances to develop a business. Same with home ownership or whatever, business ownership. So those, from what I understand, sort of the conceptual blockchain guys are very much looking at that way as well, to securing or increasing the chances of people that don't have that many chances now. And there's a story from a blockchain entrepreneur who I think is from Venezuela, where not the best place in the world to start an internet business, but through blockchain he's been able to get out of that and look at ways for entrepreneurs, whether in a tech world or in another world, to, if you give them something that they can rely on, something that's immutably theirs, or that they can start a company that's scalable in the world, then you give them much more chance to unlock people's potential wherever they are.
So who are who else have you come across that has interested you or think are doing interesting things? So we've spoken about Swarm City, and I probably should talk to those guys. Who else have you come across?
Sort of the slightly off the radar, but sort of the weirder ones or not weird ones. The more fundamental ones are things like Swarm City, District 0x, which is also like a marketplace for peer-to-peer economy. And then the two ones that intrigue me is Aragon, which is basically they're trying to create, can you use the blockchain to do sort of things like jurisdiction or company registration in a way where the terms and conditions of a company and the token that comes with it, the share, but it's not really a share, can be programmed in the blockchain. So you could register your company on a blockchain and not necessarily in the legal system.
So this would mean, help me understand this, this means Aragon would come up with an idea. So if you were a corporation and you set up this up on the blockchain, you couldn't break your own rules. So if you say you're going to
be much more transparent, all parties involved would kind of know what they get into, and there's a whole vote, voting is a big thing in blockchain because it's effectively you transfer the right to say something, you can use it once. So you create all kind of new models of organizations, they're not necessarily companies anymore, and set the rules in such a way that, again, the common incentive will prevail over individual incentives, or at least they're transparent, etc., etc.
So this sounds very science fiction. So what we're telling, and I'm going to have to look up Aragon. So Aragon would basically mean a company's almost like this science fiction creation that it runs itself. Like, yeah, people will influence it and vote to make it make decisions, but the actual day-to-day, like running the board, making the big decisions, potentially paying taxes, that's all automated because it's like automated part of the structure of a company.
Automated when the triggers are right, when the ifs are correct, then the that's will follow. But there's lots of scenarios and I'm not sure I haven't looked at them for a few months. I'm not sure in what status they are. But those are the kind of things that these guys are working on.
So this would mean that like
version of a platform.
So this would mean like the CEO of the business would be less running the business, and he's more like the conductor telling the orchestra what to do, or just helping guide it, or actually he's the guy talking to the voters, the other people on the board, encouraging which direction to go.
Could be one of the models, or there could be more of a cooperative model where there aren't really CEOs. That's the kind of things that can work. So there isn't really, it's more of a wisdom of the crowd. I'm not saying that they're good, but you can start programming these things into these applications.
So that to me really sounds like Web 4.0, that there is the basics of the economy and the basics of business and the basic of making money and creating jobs could be fundamentally different because it's all run by machines. So that would be kind of blockchain AI together. Yeah.
The connection with AI is also intriguing. I haven't dug really deep into that yet, but it could be. Yeah, that's an intriguing one. But it's more about like new forms of governance. You set kind of new forms of governance for people who work together in some capacity or another, as partners in a business, but maybe also as investors or employees.
So in a way, actually, this kind of structure, like what government is with people voting for it and what businesses are, they're kind of becoming a bit closer. I think we always think of government and business as being very separate, but actually in this world, they're kind of running on the same infrastructure. They've kind of got the same rules telling them what to do. Okay, that's really fascinating. And tell me about District Zero. Is this like a new eBay or a new Amazon, or am I getting confused about that?
Yeah, it's more. Yeah, I guess what they're trying to create. Well, the last time I checked, because at some point I stopped getting input from my book, but it's a similar ambition as I understand it, like the guys from Swamp City, similar, where they want to enable peer-to-peer marketplaces, where they want to make sure that you could start a business on their little marketplace and it comes with a whole set of functions already, which is a kind of what Swamp City wants to do as well, where they've made one function, the Uber app, so to speak, which is, I think they're releasing a new version anytime soon. But then the framework is there, and it's like, okay, we've created a physical marketplace. Why don't you create your own stall now? And a bunch of functions of this marketplace are there. There's concrete, there's electricity, so to speak. Now
so it's almost like they've built a department store and gone, hey, you can fill up the shelves with your stuff, but the tills are there, the staff are there. Okay, the
contracts are there. We have a currency. We have a platform for conflict regulations, whatever. So they're creating that function now.
So this
in
is
order to allow people to do
Silk Road. which is not the Silk Road, but it's taking that tech behind the Silk Road and turning it into a mainstream idea. Or actually, no, it's not even Silk Road.
No, it's not. Because the difference is again in the I don't know exactly the model from District 0x, but it's coin based. It's about a niche coin for niche economies, and the idea is also that I think it's the same with District 0x, but with Swarm City, it's again that there is no real company. It's a bunch of founders who've gotten a lot of the coins, but that's it. There's no shares, there's no fee structure, or hardly any. So they work for shareholders.
They've built a community hall and then they've walked away, and anyone can use that community hall.
Go for it. But the more that everybody does business in the community hall, the better for everybody who owns these coins, because they'll go up in value over time, or at least they won't decrease, and that's their bonus, so to speak, that they've been getting, or the common value that they try to rally around and make sure that everybody does stuff that is to the best intent for everybody.
So that's interesting. It's I think the hardest bit to explain to people are still coins and tokens. And to be honest, I'm in it, and I still struggle sometimes. All right, we're probably beginning to run out of time a little bit, but tell me more about your book, what it's about, what journey it takes you through, why people should read it.
Yeah, if it ever comes out in English, then I'll definitely. But the idea was then.
Well, what's the name of the book?
Say again?
What's the name?
The name is Blockchain is WTF, because it's a play on what the fuck is it actually. And WTF in Dutch, it works a little bit better than in English. But the WTF then stands for probably fundamental. Waarschijnlijk toch fundamenteel in Dutch, but probably fundamental. To pinpoint the idea, like there's something happening here, which, as you say, this might be a completely new way of looking at things. And the probably is there because I have a keen interest in this whole thing, and I have a little bit of hope, but I'm also a bit of a realist and see that there is so many ways. We're old enough now, Vlad, to know that some things in the world don't always go the way that you hope they go. So
do you know
there's a little bit of cynicism.
I loved what you said, but could you do me a favor? Could you because I think I might put this up on Instagram or something as a separate bit, and people watching this on YouTube are going to see us negotiating how we're doing this as being radically transparent. Do you want to mention the name of the book and pitch and tell me what the title is? It's like a standalone, like you said all the words so people understand, it stands alone as a clip.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Blockchain is WTF, because it's based on that whole, do it again. So the title of the book is Blockchain is WTF, because it's based on that reaction that I always get, like, what the fuck is blockchain? But it's also a play on in Dutch it works a little bit better about waarschijnlijk toch fundamenteel, WTF, which stands for blockchain is probably fundamental. It's going to change, it has the opportunity to change a lot of things on a fundamental way. But probably is there because, there's been a lot of promises in the world, and it doesn't always happen the way that you want it to happen, basically. So that's why the cynicism or the realism comes in as well.
So if I could read Dutch, what would the book be telling me about? What's the journey the book takes me through?
Yeah, I try to explain what it actually is in a non-technical way, why it is technically special. I also say that you kind of need to understand that a little bit to fully appreciate the potential of it. But once we've explained that, you can move on. And then I try to explain what it is on these three levels. Blockchain 1.0 is about blockchain's pretty good at doing financial transactions in a relatively cheap, relatively quick, secure, immutable way. And there's lots of use cases for that. That's why banks are interested, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important to understand that because it comes back in blockchain 3.0. So blockchain 1.0 is it's good at sending money around. Blockchain 2.0 is more that idea of smart contracts and that you can actually start building blockchain-based applications around. So it's more about blockchain is good at running applications that do stuff, transactions in an immutable way, about validations, explain about lots of use cases and a variety of industries where it has potential or where they're experimenting with. So it becomes more pragmatic. I have the ambition there, and I need to reread it again to see if it's worked, to actually start using some kind of canvas, a framework for businesses to start looking at where can it affect our business as a threat or as an opportunity, ideally. So they can. It's not a self-help book, but at least it tries to trigger the right questions. And then my point is then like that's blockchain 2.0 is extremely valuable to optimize businesses, but it's still optimization of an existing value flow. And 3.0 is this promise, the slightly more, the things that we've been talking about, of redesigning the value flow, where the added value is rewarded in different kind of ways. The things about peer-to-peer economy, the things about these new governance models, the things about new ways of working together in a non-trusted kind of way, but still add value and know that you'll be rewarded X, Y, and Z for it. There's projects like Aragon, Colony, Swamp City, etc., etc. And then you get a new idea of what they call the new economy, of what they call the internet of value, etc., etc. So it takes you through these different layers of the onion, the different layers of complexity that blockchain really is. And I know I haven't even covered all of it by far, but at least I'm trying at getting people up to speed in these 3 different levels, so they realize that there's more to it.
So that's the next book, I take it, going in deeper.
Yeah, we'll see.
So when do you expect the book to come out?
It takes a lot of time writing books.
When do you expect? I know it's with a publisher right now. When do you expect the book to come out?
It should be out January.
Okay, so it's not a Christmas present, but it's a new year.
Just about don't make that, no.
All right, so January 2018. All right, I've got a final question for you, or hopefully it's not too weird and complicated. So look, if we look back at history, last 1,000 years, whatever else, we look at the big game changers that have happened in our world. So the game changers that have happened have been like the printing press, and then the world changed because everyone could read, everyone could get hold of books, everyone can get hold of information. Then the next kind of big change, I guess, was industrialization, machines, or even before that, like, water-powered machines, but machines and factories and, and building things. And, then there are other kind of minor ones like transport, trains, airplanes, whatever else. And then the one that we're all familiar with, or most people alive today will be familiar with, which is the internet and kind of computers, or the internet especially, from the mid-90s onwards. Maybe a lot of people now don't remember that. I guess if you're under 35, 40, you probably don't remember the world pre-internet, or maybe a bit older. But half the population are. That's fundamentally changed how people who are alive today live their lives. Looking at blockchain, where do you rank kind of blockchain AI, this kind of what people are calling the 4th industrial revolution? That all this kind of new super clever tech that's coming out, decentralization. Where do you see that in the scale of like Gutenberg printing press, industrial revolution, coming of the internet?
I think it's a building on the internet, especially with blockchain. AI, different kettle of fish, I guess, but blockchain for me is, I have compared Web 2.0 and social media. I did compare it once to the printing press because it was another democratization process. As you rightly say, printing press made sure that lots of people were able to read and express their opinions, etc., etc. Internet 2.0 was the same thing to a certain extent. All of a sudden, we didn't have to know Silvio Berlusconi or some hot shot Trump, whatever, to get something on telly. Media was controlled, and social media was like, oh, we all have now a voice. Whether that you use it for better or for worse wasn't really the point, but we could create Wikipedia, we could have YouTube channels, etc., etc. And I think blockchain builds on that it's not just a democratization of information, because that worked relatively well, but it's a democratization of value exchange. That has the promise, right? I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow, but it has that promise in that. So in that extent, for me, it's more the new version of the internet, rather than something completely different. It's more built on an internet technology as well. So it's more, let's look at it as a more powerful way of using the internet.
Okay, I guess, it's one bit I think I might disagree with you a little bit, but only, and I'll tell you why. And I think maybe if we look at in 100 years, people look back and we'll probably see it as the same thing because it's 20 years apart or whatever else. But I must admit, for me, it feels more fundamental, and I'll tell you the reason why. It is built on the internet, and in that way, it's not something really new. It's a different way of doing it. So I get that. But for me, the fundamental is, you know, we spoke about how this might change how businesses work, how government works. You know, I think, you know, if I look at the pitch document I wrote about this movie, I kind of said, you know, at the moment, technology, internet, we've kind of MacGyvered like the old ways of doing stuff and doing them with computers. But this is a way of actually doing things that only a computer could do, that is native to a networked kind of wired up world, and it just wasn't possible before. So yeah, I feel like it's like we put everything on the internet, but we put everything we had on the internet, and this new next stage.
Yeah, I see where you come from. No, I agree with you. I think, let's put it this way. I think we might look back at it in 100 years' time and realize that this is the internet, and the one that we had 20, 30 years ago wasn't really the internet. And this is the fundamental part.
Okay, all right, that's really interesting. All right, so I think this ends our formal interview. So thank you very much. And I'm not even going to attempt to say it, even though I should be better with names. Your name, I'm just going to call you Gerrie because that's what I can handle.
That's how we know each other, Vlad.
And thank you very much.